Well, hello and welcome back to another episode of 10-Minute Strategy. My name is Peter Prop. I run sales and marketing for Knock Media. And in this series, 10-Minute Strategy, we talk with experts in the field. We use the limiting factor of time to get them to get to the net important data that we want to share. Today, we're here with a friend of mine, Jacques Pavlenyi. We worked together at IBM. Back in the day, I was running global campaign marketing for the WebSphere brand, and Jacques was essentially an Americas-based service provider group. He ran the Americas SMB marketing for IBM software back in the day. So we got to know each other then. Jacques always did a terrific job of explaining how he was going to go to market. A lot of brands like mine would give Jacques our money, and in return, he would provide massive numbers of leads.
Well, I hope I succeeded. Plus, it was a village, right? The America's SMB marketing team was significantly large, and I was really happy to be a big part of that team. But definitely had some strong leadership, and it was an amazing team to work with at the time.
Yeah, and since then, Jacques has worked for a variety of startups and larger companies, including UiPath and ADP, just to name two. So he's really an expert in this area of go-to-market. And so we wanted to talk about what's the latest trends in this area. And let's just jump right into it. Jacques, you've been running campaigns for years. What marketing tech providers do you rely on? And what are the trends in terms of offerings from these providers? And what's the outlook for this industry?
First of all, Peter, thanks for having me on the show. I'm really excited to be part of this Knock Media series. And I also wanted to just say I come from a B2B background, so a lot of what I'm going to talk about could be a bit specific to B2B, but there's so much overlap between business to business and business to consumer that I'm sure even our B2C audiences are going to hopefully get a lot out of this. But going to your first question around the MarTech landscape, I just did a quick check, and there was over 10,000 vendors currently in the 2023 MarTech vendor landscape. We can include a link to in the show notes afterwards. There's so many vendors, they actually built an interactive map for the number of vendors that they have. For me, this is like the paradox of choice. People want choice, but when there's too many choices, our brains can't handle the volume. So we either shut down and don't make a choice, or fall back on rules of thumb like what brand is it coming from or who's referring it. In terms of outlook, I can only guess that there's probably going to be some kind of consolidation that's about to happen in the MarTech space. As those of us who are reading the news a lot, we know that there's a recession-ish kind of market in enterprise technology today. There's lots of sources of innovation around AI, for example, but VC funding is actually way down year over year. And Gartner is also seeing something similar. Their recent CMO Spend and Survey showed that 75% of CMOs are either going to cut investments in new MarTech, or they're going to optimize their existing spend. So I think the innovation is going to look good, but the outlook overall is going to be a bit cloudy for the MarTech space in the coming 6 months or so. In terms of the tech that I've relied on, obviously, depending on the companies that I've been at, I've used a lot of different tools. I think what's most important, though, is that tools should follow strategy. Whatever tools you use, you shouldn't be leading with the tool. You should be leading with what's your process, what's your business outcomes you're trying to drive, and ultimately, how does the tool support that? It's easy to fall into that tech trap. I'm a techie. I love technology. But for example, a recent conversation I was having with a CEO mentioned, we were talking about how to have more tech-forward messaging and innovation in our technology stacks. And he challenged me to stay focused not on the pure innovation per se, but more on what is it delivering to customers. So some of the examples of tools that I've used, let's start with CRM and marketing automation, clearly top of mind for most marketers. I've used HubSpot, I've used Salesforce. I think HubSpot's gotten a lot better. Salesforce is, the big daddy of them all. I know Marketo and Oracle are pretty popular. And I know a lot of small businesses are using Microsoft Dynamics or MailChimp. So it all depends on what you need, but there's a lot of good tools out there for that. In terms of account-based marketing, I've used Salesforce Pardot, I've used Engagio, but I have a heretical thought around ABM. I don't think you actually need an ABM platform unless you've already exhausted your existing customer relationship management or marketing automation tools. I think with some well thought out business processes, you can get away with doing ABM with your existing CRM tech stack. For project and task management, that's been a game changer. Tools like that give you Kanban boards, for example, or task management like Asana, Trello, Rike, Monday, ZenHub. They all make marketing processes so much better than just trying to rely on email or Slack or spreadsheets or SharePoint. I think having those task management tools are like a big, big improvement to overall marketing effectiveness. Collaboration, obviously there's the two 800-pound gorillas, either the Microsoft universe or the Google Workplace universe. Honestly, they both serve their purpose, and it's a preference of one over the other. I think the same goes for like Zoom versus Google Meet versus Skype versus Teams. It's all in what you're using, and they all kind of do 80% of the same things. So I tend to prefer Microsoft and Zoom, but that's just me.
So you don't speak of Slack in glowing terms. It's not one of your faves.
I think Slack is a great tool for short bursts of collaboration. To me, it's often a noise machine, similar to Teams. It's not that different that way. It's hard to find things, at least for me. Things tend to get lost in Slack conversations. I think it's great to connect with folks one-on-one. I think group chats are fine too, but they start to get a little messy and hard to track, honestly.
Mhm.
It's not that much different than email. I know that seems a bit old school or heretical, but that's my viewpoint.
All right.
I wanted to end with two other tech things. Content management. I've used tools like Post, but honestly, it feels like overkill to a certain degree. I think if you have a strong office suite and you're using good processes with a shared drive, you're using task management like Trello, and maybe even some lightweight automation like a Microsoft Flow, for example. I think that's a great place to start for content lifecycle management. When you get to be a larger company or a lot of content and a lot of engine, maybe a tool like Post becomes worth it, but they're expensive. And so you don't necessarily, I don't think, need one out of the gate. And then, of course, sales enablement, obviously for a B2B standpoint, really critical. I've used three different tools: Paperflight, HighSpot, and Seismic. They all pretty much do the same thing, which is really about organizing sales collateral, sales content, enablement materials, making it easier to track who's using what and what impact it's having on deals. They're all good, though some are more expensive than others. So you want to look at that price point. That's important to you.
Sure. Great. And I know you've been involved in both aggressive sort of growth hacking efforts and account-based marketing and other more refined techniques. Can you give me some examples of some programs you ran that really worked and delivered that replicable ROI that we're always looking for?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. To be honest, I've done growth hacking and I've seen growth hacking for about 10 years now. And although you can certainly generate some pretty impressive short-term results, we did a program for a product launch that generated about 1 billion impressions and 75,000 views to a new product download. I think my experience with growth hacking is it tends to feel like dopamine hits or caffeine addiction. If you see the poster behind me, drink coffee, do stupid things faster with more energy. Sometimes I feel like growth hacking can feel like that to me. It's you're doing a lot of jittery short-term tactics that don't necessarily wind up with high ROI, maybe low conversion rates, irritated customers, and maybe a diminished brand. What I'm seeing that's I think is working is the evolution from growth hacking to growth marketing, which to me is now a healthier mix of performance marketing, product-led growth, and other things to help drive that better ROI. And to me, what drives that repeatable ROI is really three things. One, it's got to start with the basics. If your tactics aren't built on a solid foundation in your customer behavior and how you serve them, and that messaging, the ICP, the positioning, all that deep insight about your buyer needs, then you're throwing a lot of good money after bad. So really make sure you have good product marketing and good insights into your buyer behavior and your ICPs. Then that's when account-based marketing and product-led growth really take over, right? For B2B, I believe you really need both those sides of the same coin. You need that sales-led motion, but move away from I guess we used to call them MQLs, marketing qualified leads, and more towards account-based marketing. Think of that as your top-down approach. You're going after the enterprise at the enterprise level or more strategic. But you also need that user level marketing, that product-led growth type motion. Is your product actually solving jobs to be done? Is it making an impact on users? I hate that term. I wish there was a better term for it. People who use your software, or your product or service, right? Are they loving what they're doing? Obviously, in a B2B standpoint, they don't have a lot of choice in the matter, but they still have a huge influence on the actual decision making. So if you're hopefully making good use of their time. And then I think it's always important to leave a little bit aside for experimentation, right? Your entire budget shouldn't all be programmatic. You should be trying new things, trying new creatives, trying new channels. You're not going to know what's going to outperform until you try different things.
Right.
But if you experiment too much, my experience is you wind up chasing keywords, or you're chasing a digital fad, which may give you some buyer insights, but not necessarily a lot of that repeatable ROI you were asking about.
Right. Right. And so I think this leads naturally, about prioritizing performance marketing versus brand marketing awareness. I think your point of view is it's really one thing. It's got to be on brand, but yeah, let's invest. Let's really get aggressive as appropriate. Is that your perspective?
I think that's exactly right. I think we both agree with Jim Stengel on this. He's the former CMO of Procter & Gamble. Has a long-standing popular podcast, the CMO podcast. He talks a lot about this brand versus performance dichotomy, and I think it's a false dichotomy. I think for two reasons. On the brand side, every tactic is a brand tactic. Every touch you do either reinforces or diminishes your brand, because your brand is built up over years and years of consistent, concerted tactics and efforts. Every single one of your performance touches is either feeding into that positive sentiment and emotion around your brand, or it's taking away from it. We saw how important brand was during the pandemic, and certainly that was both on the B2B and the B2C side. Is people were flocking back to what they felt comfortable with in a great time of uncertainty, and brands really matter. And so every tactic you do needs to be thought of in the context of, am I destroying brand value by juicing up too much short-term revenue? On the flip side, right, every tactic should have a performance element. I'm not a believer in old style brand messaging and marketing, or advertising, I should say, in the sense that if it's not contributing to your pipeline or your revenue, either directly or indirectly, whether this quarter or next quarter, it's just a creative project, right? We're marketers. We're not creating pieces of art. We're creating pieces of commerce, and they have to drive business. And now that we have new ways to measure attribution, new ways to look at marketing mix modeling, for example, better connected customer journeys with your customer data platforms and your CRM, that old adage that 50% of my advertising is wasted, I just don't know which 50%,
Right.
I think is starting to finally go away. But you got to have a lot of data to be able to see, what are your tactics actually doing in market. So a brand tactic may not drive short-term revenue, but it better have some positive impact on sales or pipeline or brand sentiment that's measurable.
Right.
I've seen bad examples at both extremes. I've seen good examples at both extremes. To me, it really comes down to that balance.
Excellent. Jacques, there's a lot of ideas that I wanted to talk to you about in the future. So let's put a pin in this conversation for today.
Yeah.
And I look forward to reconnecting again and getting a little more into maybe the way you view planning and some stuff like that, where I think you could really share some other really cool insights. So I think that'll be fun. So for 10-minute strategy and Knock Media, this is Peter Prop. Jacques Pavlenyi, thanks so much for your time, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Take care.